Okay, thank you, Kevin. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person, but I guess this is the next best thing. So let me share my slides with you. There, you should be able to see my slides now, and perhaps you can see a little image of myself as well. Okay, I'll just plunge straight into this. The title is self-explanatory. I hope an illusionist framework for sensorimotor theory. I'm going to suggest that illusionism as a metaphysical framework for thinking about consciousness. Illusionism provides a good metaphysical framework for thinking about sensorimotor theory. And so I've represented sensorimotor theory by Kevin, of course, and illusionism by Dan Dennett. Dan has used the metaphor of illusion in talking about consciousness for many years, and it's where I picked up inspiration from coining the term illusionism, and I think and Dan has endorsed the label, so he can be the representative of it here. And the talk is going to be a fairly short one, I hope. I don't ramble on too much. I'm going to begin by introducing illusionism, just saying what I mean by illusionism as a metaphysical framework. And then I will show how that framework is one into which sensorimotor theory fits very nicely. And things that Kevin has already said, I think you'll see how they harmonize well with the illusionist approach. And then finally, I'll address an objection, which is more one of presentation than of substance, which is to do with the labeling of this position as illusionist, use of the term illusion. And I'll say a bit to defend that. Okay, so let's just begin with a quick introduction to illusionism. Some of you will know what it is. So this will be a brief refresher for you, those who don't. Quick introduction. So, illusionism is, first of all, let me say what illusionism is not. It's not a denial of consciousness. It's not the claim that consciousness is an illusion. It's a denial of a certain view of what consciousness is. So if you take a certain view of what consciousness is, I might be saying that consciousness in your sense is illusory, but I'm not saying that consciousness to core is illusory. And I don't mean that consciousness in the everyday sense is illusory. And it's a metaphysical theory. It's a theory of, it's an account of the kind of state that consciousness is. Okay. And therefore of what needs to be explained by a theory of consciousness. It's an account of what the explanandum for a theory of consciousness is. And I'll suggest that sensorimotor theory provides at least part of that explanation. I think I will show that illusionism poses certain questions, distinctive questions, different from other approaches to consciousness, and I'll suggest that sensorimotor theory is well placed to answer, or at least to give part of the answer to those questions. So let's start just very quickly with an overview of what this illusionist framework is. Let's start with conscious experience. Well, by conscious experience, I mean these states that we enter throughout our waking lives and during our dreaming lives, perhaps. States of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting in an attentive way. States of attentive bodily sensation of pain, itches, tickles, tingles, and so on. We can recognize these states when they occur in us, and we can recognize them pretty reliably when they occur in other people, at least many of them. I can tell when my dog is in pain. I can tell that with great reliability. And we know in outline what these states involve in very general outline. They involve processing information and generating reactions. It's about as general as you can get. Something like this. Sense organs stimulated by environmental proximal stimuli. They send signals to sensory processing regions, which do all kinds of work on them, extracting different sorts of information about distal stimuli. Attention targets some of that information, just distributes it to various control systems, which in turn generate a host of reactions. Some of these reactions are immediate motor reactions. That's the green arrow coming right out to the apple. Some of them are psychological reactions. Effects on memory, reasoning, planning, etc. It's hard to overestimate the richness and complexity of this pattern of reactions. Some of them are below the radar of consciousness, perhaps, but they maybe shape the overall character of the experience in some way. Now, the processes I'm talking about here are characterizable in broadly functional terms, in terms of their causes and effects. And I think everyone agrees that processes like this are occurring during experience. And they're perhaps characterizable in representational terms. That's representational talk is a common resource in cognitive science. Not the only game in town, of course. Activist approaches, dynamical systems approaches. Illusionism is comfortable with all of these, provided they're functioning. Okay, so let's replace that already very schematic diagram with an even more schematic one. Information coming in, marked by the red arrow, and a raft of reactions occurring, both internal psychological reactions and overt motor actions. Now, okay, so I think pretty much everybody's happy with that's broad outline. But some people will say that that story, true as it might be, misses out something crucial, something perhaps the very essence of experience. In the case of my lady here, this is Lady Monteagle, by the way. She I think she was lady in waiting to one of Henry VIII's wives, I think perhaps Jane Seymour, and this sketch is by Hans Holbein, and she's looking at an apple for no particular reason. So what it omits, what these functionalist accounts omit, is the feel of seeing red, where that's supposed to be something distinct from, but accompanying all the informational and reactive processes that I mentioned. And this is often said to be an intrinsic feature of the process. It's can't be captured in terms of the causes and effects that are going on, in terms of the information that's being processed, the reactions that are being generated. It can't be captured in terms of those relations between inputs and outputs, and so it's an intrinsic feature. It's often said to be private. Only you can really know what it's like to see red for you. Ineffable, hard to get any grip on, any descriptive grip on what redness is like in itself. Say there's the feel that's produced by red things, but it's hard to get any more direct grip on it, any immediate grip on its nature. And to be immediately known, the lady here might be mistaken about there being a red apple in front of her, but she's attending, introspecting carefully, she can't be mistaken about there being a red feel associated with it. And so various names for this: qualia, raw feels, phenomenal properties, what it is, likenesses, you all know this. Sometimes those terms are used with different connotations. I'm going to smear over all of that and just rely on this characterization here as distinct from informational reactive processes. And I'm going to use the term phenomenal feel just for convenience. And of course, this is supposed to pose a hard problem, a problem different in kind from all the other kinds of problems that that cognitive scientists face in explaining other aspects of the mind. They are, compared to this, they are difficult as they may be, they are easy problems. This is a problem that's different in kind, that may require a metaphysical, a new metaphysics, or a new science, something. You all know this. So in short, illusionism simply denies the reality of phenomenal fields in that sense. It says they don't exist. Reasons for doing this, I won't go into this here, but they've been reasons for taking this view. I've outlined some in various places. And Dennett has written several books about this, and as well as a famous 1988 paper, Quine in Qualia. Various reasons that the very anomalousness of these things is a reason for at least suspecting that they might be illusory. Some things poses a different problem that's different in kind from the problems posed by all other things. Then, well, maybe that's a reason for suspecting it might not be real. These, as theoretical posits, qualia don't seem to do much work at all. I mean, we're all familiar with positing unobservables, but these things seem to be a very special kind of unobservable, in that unobservable by anyone except the subject, of course. They don't do any theoretical work. You seem to be able to explain all the measurable reactions without mentioning and the various epistemic problems. This is the heart of Dennett's critique of qualia. How we could have the kind of knowledge of these things that we're supposed to have. That's perhaps the central issue. So illusionists say that experience is functional through and through. There's no aspect of it that is radically private. Of course, it's contingently private, and it's buried away within our skulls. But these processes are not radically private with the right sort of tools. They could be publicly investigated. Neither the ineffable nor directly known. They're just a regular part of the world, on the same sort of footing as other parts of the world. So if you take this view, well, you've freed yourself from the hard problem. You've no problem of explaining phenomenal field because you've denied that it exists. Instead, you've got the problem of explaining our beliefs about phenomenal field. Okay, so we seem to have a strong conviction, at least with suitable priming. People can become very strongly convinced that they are aware of these phenomenal fields, distinct from all functional processes. So you have the problem of explaining that. Why are people so convinced that phenomenal fields exist, and why do they have the beliefs about the character of particular phenomenal fields that they have, about the structure of phenomenal fields, the way they're related to each other, how they differ from one another? So what needs explaining is the hetero, in Dennett's terms, the heterophenomenology, not the phenomenology. The heterophenomenology is essentially our reports about our phenomenology. We take those reports very seriously indeed, but we don't take them necessarily at face value. Okay, there's no hard problem. Instead, there's what I call the illusion problem, which is very similar to what David Chalmers calls the meta problem, which is the problem of explaining why we think there's a hard problem. Okay, so that's a very quick introduction well, that's an introduction to one side of illusionism. Illusionism has two sides. One side is the negative side. It's the denial of phenomenal fields. The other side is a positive side, a positive program of solving the illusion problem, explaining the heterophenomenology. So that's the other side. And schematically, that's going to go something like this. We're going to have to posit self-monitoring processes of some kind. Let's call them introspective processes, which monitor and model certain aspects of experience. So the red arrow here is another informational stream going to some self-modeling system, and the dotted area is the aspect of experience that is targeted by this self-monitoring system, and that aspect may be larger. Like that, it might include the whole informational reactive complex every aspect of it, or it might be quite small and discrete. It might just be some very local, very specific feature of that complex of experience. Whatever, there's some aspect of experience is experience here. I'm using experience, remember, in the functional sense, not in the phenomenal sense. I want to be clear about that. I mean, experience conceived as a complex informational reactive engagement with the world. So some aspect of experience is monitored and modeled by introspective systems, which then generate further reactions, including experience reports. So if you have this introspective monitoring, you're able to issue reports on your own experience, assuming you have language. And also another thing that this generates is beliefs about phenomenal fields and their nature. So self-monitoring, self-modeling induces you to form the belief that your experiences have a distinctive phenomenal feel to them, and to say certain things about the nature of that field and how it compares and contrasts with the nature of other fields. Now, it's very important to stress here that the suggestion isn't that this introspective monitoring actually gives experiences a phenomenal feel. The claim isn't that that makes experiences like something. No, experiences in themselves are as like something as they're ever going to be. This monitoring doesn't add anything to the experiences. It doesn't make an inner light come on. It doesn't create a phenomenal feel. It doesn't endow the experience with a phenomenal feel. It doesn't need to. So in that respect, this approach contrasts with approaches like hot theory, higher order thought theory, or other higher order representational theories, which do say that. They say that they are realist theories, phenomenal realist theories, and they say that this kind of introspective monitoring makes the lights come on. Somehow produces a phenomenal feel. And that is not the illusionist approach. The illusionist says what it creates is the belief in phenomenal fields and beliefs about the character of specific phenomenal fields. Creates heterophenomenology, not phenomenology. So it doesn't add anything extra, it merely induces us to believe that there's something extra. And that's the illusion in illusionism. Okay, I can sum all that up in one picture involving Lady Monteagle again. In the illusionist view, consciousness is an engagement, an informational reactive engagement with the world. Red arrows indicating information, green arrows indicating reactions of various kinds. An engagement with the world, and also with our engagement with the world. Okay, so it also has this higher order character, at least in the human case. It's an engagement with the world, an engagement with our engagement with it. Okay, so that was illusionism in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Let's move on now and to sensorimotor theory. I didn't have sensorimotor theory in mind as the paradigm of an illusionist approach, but when I started to read some of Kevin's work and listen to him talking about it, I found that I thought it fitted pretty well. And I think you will have seen, will have picked up from what Kevin has already said, that there's a close harmony between what he's trying to do and what illusionists propose. And we can illustrate this by going back to Kevin's metaphysical shift. Okay, and this is what Kevin said. He said that something it's like is seen to be a collection of capacities instead of a single magical thing. He used the word magical there, which is again picking up on this notion of illusion, I think. And And he drew a parallel with the way that vital spirit was discovered to be not a single animating essence, but again, a collection of biological capacities. Life was in that way de-reified. And this is exactly what illusionism proposes, a de-reification of experience, if you like, getting rid of the experiential spirit and reconceptualizing consciousness as a collection of capacities. Okay, reconceptualizing it in entirely functional terms. So informational reactive complexes, that kind of engagement that I described. So illusionism de-reifies phenomenal field, gets rid of that magical essence, and replaces it with this complex, with this informational reactive complex. So the underlying metaphysics, I think, is pretty much between sensorimotor theory. The underlying metaphysics of sensorimotor theory is, I think, essentially that of illusionism. Okay, so now let's make the connections a little bit more detailed. Let's go back to the illusion, what I call the illusion problem. And there are three questions here, I think, for illusionism. No, there are many questions, but three to start off with. Three's more than enough to start off with. One question, which I've already mentioned, is which aspects of experience are targeted by introspection? Okay. What is the extent, what is the location and extent of that dotted area, the bits of experience that are of the informational reactive complex that are targeted by introspection? Which? Second question, how? How do these aspects generate beliefs about phenomenal fields? How do they generate the belief that this experience has an ineffable intrinsic field to it, and how does it generate the beliefs about our beliefs about the specific character of those fields? And third, why are these aspects targeted? What's the point of monitoring these aspects of experience? I mean, is it just to make us think there's a hard problem, to deceive us into thinking there's a hard problem? What's it for? Presumably not, although maybe. Nicholas Humphrey has a view that is on those very lines. Okay, so three questions for illusionism. Now, some suggestions. There is an emerging research program, I think, on this, and some existing research programs that weren't originally framed in this way can be, I think, co-opted by illusionists. Suggestions for which aspects? Well, attention. That's just one suggestion. Michael Graziano has developed that suggestion in a great deal of detail. I won't try to go into these here. There's no time. Another aspect: evaluative responses. Are evaluative responses, automatic evaluative responses to stimuli? Very interesting suggestion developed by Nicholas Humphrey, which I think has some strong connections with the sensorimotor approach. Kevin mentioned that. Associations and affective reactions, that's something that Dennett has proposed, and I've endorsed that in various places. Some suggestions for which? Suggestions for why? Why? Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I put, sorry, slight confusion. I put how first, didn't I? I put how second, and now I'm going on to onto why second. Sorry about that. This doesn't matter. Why are these aspects monitored? Graziano argues that attention is monitored for control purposes. In order to be able to control attention effectively, the brain needs a model of it. It needs to monitor attentional processes, and then it can use the model that it constructs to control them more effectively. For enrichment, this is something that Humphrey has argued. He says that monitoring our evaluative responses to stimuli enriches our lives, gives our lives a new depth and significance. significance, yes. For communication, that's a fairly obvious suggestion. I think I've said that this monitoring enables us to generate, to produce experience reports. So that's probably going to be an element in every account. And now suggestions for how. This is a relatively neglected question, I think, which is how sensorimotor theory comes in. The general idea is that these self-monitoring systems create, how does this self-monitoring create the illusion of phenomenality? Essentially by caricaturing the complex processes it's monitoring. So these processes are, these informational reactive processes are immensely complex. The self-monitoring systems don't need to represent all the detail, so they blur over it all. They smear over it and create a simplified, caricatured model of the global shape of that informational reactive complex. And precisely because they smear over so much detail, they create the sense of there being something here that's ineffable and intrinsic and mysterious. It's a feature of the limitations of introspection, of the lack of information we have about our own experiences. That's what creates the sense of there being some mysterious, ineffable essence underlying it all. Then it has described phenomenal fields as a user illusion, rather like the simplified caricatured representations on a computer desktop, which correspond in some very indirect way to complex data structures within the computer, but they're a useful way to enable you to, they are useful in enabling you to control the computer. Okay, so now let's get at last to sensorimotor theory. Now, sensorimotor theory has answers to these questions. Which aspects of the experience are monitored? Well, it's monitored information about our current mode of interaction with the world as summarized in sensorimotor laws. Which particular set of sensorimotor laws are being activated and applied at this moment? That's what Kevin was talking about. So I'll just refer you back to everything Kevin said there. Now, how? Now, this, I think, is the bit that really excites me about sensorimotor theory from an illusionist perspective. Again, for the reasons you've just heard in Kevin's talk, sensorimotor theory promises to give an illuminating answer to the how question. Instead of just saying, well, there's some sort of simplified caricature representation there, which is probably true. Kevin suggests that we're able to say quite a bit more, though, than that. He suggests that the structure of the sensorimotor laws is isomorphic to the structure of phenomenal fields. So the kind of things we want to say about phenomenal fields, about their imposingness and so on, about their relation between one phenomenal field and another, the similarity and so on, that those things that we want to say about the phenomenal fields correspond to features of the sensorimotor laws that are being activated. And so field talk is really a schematic way of describing those laws. So there's less need to stress the caricaturing. Doubtless there is some caricaturing going on. We don't sort of immediately introspect a whole bunch of sensorimotor laws, but what we're tracking there essentially is is information about those laws, and with a certain amount of assistance and teasing out, we can come to see that connection. That's the whole point of what Kevin's doing, and I think his talk is really illuminating from this perspective. Okay, so that's, I think, the really exciting bit from an illusionist perspective about sensorimotor theory. Why? Kevin didn't say a lot about this. This is something that I guess there's going to be a lot to say. I assume control and communication. Communication is going to be central to this on any account, I think. Right? If we can monitor our own experiences, then we can tell other people about them. But I think control is also going to be important to a sensorimotor account. But that's something that that is for further explanation. And of course, it may be that these various suggestions are not incompatible, that there could be simultaneous modeling of various different aspects of experience for different purposes, and that field talk is an upshot of the whole multifaceted, multifunctional process. But I do think sensorimotor theory is a strong contender to be a central part of the story. That's what excites me. Okay, I'm nearly done now, so let me close by addressing an objection here. So a lot of people say to me, well, I kind of like the view that you have, but I don't like the name. I don't like it being called illusionism. It suggests you're saying something crazy and obviously false. And such a person might say something like this. So it's a presentational way. Suppose you're happy with this idea of getting rid of the experiential spirit and talking instead and conceptualizing consciousness as an informational reactive complex. Still, you might say that I don't want to describe that as involving an illusion. It's bad presentation. Let's grant that sensorimotor theory has no place for these phenomenal fields characterized in the way I did earlier, as things posing a hard problem. But still, why eliminate those concepts? And similarly, concepts of qualia, what it is likeness. So why not just revise them in the light of sensorimotor theory and say that phenomenal fields just are patterns of sensorimotor relations? And again, as Kevin stressed, not that they're caused by them, but that they actually are them. That's what phenomenal fields really are. Okay. And indeed, Kevin showed how field talk could be construed as talk about sensorimotor laws. So this would seem to be a reasonable move. Of course, it won't satisfy people who are still convinced that phenomenal fields are conceptually distinct from anything that might be described in sensorimotor terms, but still, we could push for this kind of revision. And then we could retain the language of phenomenal realism, though not the substance. And that might be an easier sell to people. I'm going to stick to my guns here. I think there are several reasons for doing so. First, honesty. I'm saying anyone who's coming along on this journey with me, we are denying the reality of phenomenal fields in one very common sense, just as modern biologists are denying the reality of vital spirit, elan vital. They are denying it. In that sense, no truck with it. And it's as well to be upfront about that. Second, ease. I think it's the trouble with trying to sort of de-essentialize, de-reify the concept of phenomenal field is that it just has too much baggage with it. These concepts, qualia and so on, they have all this philosophical baggage. They're associated with a whole bunch of intuitions about possibility of undetectable inversion of qualia, the conceivability of zombies who have all the functions without the field, Mary and a black and white room and so on. It's too much philosophical baggage. You'd have to strip all that away and stress, but as soon as you began to use the term, you'd have to have a huge footnote or something stressing that you weren't using it in that sense. Third, prudence. This approach, and this is a strong reason for me, doesn't raise expectations that can't be met. If you present sensorimotor theory as a theory of phenomenal field, then you will have people saying, but you haven't really solved the hard problem. I could imagine all of those processes, those sensorimotor processes occurring without there being any field to it, any intrinsic field to it. And they're right, they could, because they have a concept of phenomenal field that is distinct from all functional concepts. So they're right, and they're right. You won't have solved the hard problem. You can't solve the hard problem by this approach. and making it clear that you're eliminating the notion of phenomenal field prevents you from having to address that problem, okay? It doesn't raise expectations that can't be met, that you can't meet. Practicality, that's a clear experimental program solving the illusion problem, which is an easy problem in Chalmers terms. Okay, that's the problem of explaining reports, beliefs, other reactions, and so on. And finally, provocativeness. Kevin said people need to make a metaphysical shift. They do, and it's a fairly big one for some people. And I don't mind using a term that stresses that provokes people a little bit. And I think it's important to do so. And finally, we don't lose all that much by taking this view. I mean, yes, we don't talk about phenomenal fields, we don't talk about qualia, we don't talk about what it is likeness, but we can still talk about what experience is like in an everyday sense. There's no reason why I have to get rid of that locution. Crucial thing to do is not to reify it and treat such talk as referring to an immediately known what it is likeness. I'm still saying it's, the pain's awful. So just don't make that other step and say the pain involves acquaintance with a terrible awfulness. Okay, so there, I think sensorimotor theory and delusionism are made for each other. These two can be best friends, and let's work out the details of that. Right. Thank you very much. I didn't introduce myself, but if you're interested in finding out anything about me, there's a lot of information on my website. And I'm also on Twitter, annoyingly ubiquitous on Twitter. So thank you very much.